What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Outpost. We are here again. This is our first non-rankings episode since we have returned. I'm Dallas.
I'm Jay.
Make sure you go follow us on Twitter at DallasFFO and at Pick on the Block. Best place to reach us. Any questions you have. We're going to go ahead and kick it off with some recent news that's happened before we get into our segments today.
Yeah, so the first piece of news is the Bucks backfield with the big Leonard Fournette signing. Just really shifts the whole landscape of a somewhat already confusing backfield. So it provides some clarity in some places and then adds some more confusion in others. Dallas, so how you feel about the Fournette signing?
So a part of me wants to believe Arians because he's always the coach that usually says what he means. He's been one that's been pretty reliable, but like this year, I've seen a lot from him that sounds like a bunch of just coaches talking to everybody up. And he immediately came in and said, Ronald Jones is our guy. Fournette's going to have to carve his way into this offense. And I saw something, I believe it was on Twitter, I don't remember who it was, that made a really good point that, Ronald Jones, even though we were all believing this was the year he was going to break out, and prior to Fournette signing, we were all about it. Last year, he couldn't even consistently beat out Peyton Barber for the starting job. So,
yeah,
I am one of the biggest, I should say, unfair haters on Fournette, just because he just consistently lets you down every single year in fantasy. He's never burned me, and that's what people always like, oh, he burned you one year, and that's why. Like, I've just watched him cause so much misery to other people that he's just nobody. I never take him anywhere, and even I think maybe by week 2, 3, this is going to be Fournette's backfield.
Yeah, I mean, you know how I am. I'm actually not high on Fournette particularly, but really when I started to notice is he's not good, and everyone fading Fournette, which I understand why. But the problem is that just dropped his values to where there's a lot of pieces where I was able to buy Fournette for really cheap, and I was able to get him. I mean, we're talking 5th, 6th round. I mean, and honestly, he's been a really solid back, and so. I don't necessarily jump in any argument defending him as being an elite running back, but at his value. I always pick a guy that people fade because it gets to a point to where we're not fading him because of his actual production. People are just fading him to fade him, and it really just kind of skews his value. And so for me, I'll take advantage of that and just grab guys like that. And so I don't know how I feel about him being on the Bucks. I'm not necessarily going out to buy him or right now because of that. But if I have him or if I can get him for cheap because people feel frustrated by it, I'll take it. So
yeah, we'll see. For me, when he signed there, the first thing I said was, this didn't really change his status this year. If anything, maybe a little bit worse because he shares now with Ronald Jones. But it's still virtually the same. And if his draft cost has went down, then naturally I'm going to be on board with that. So I definitely, I'm out on Ronald Jones. I'll say that because that's something. His price didn't really change because all the truthers are still holding on to it. And with the coaches talk being on his side, he's still at a price where it didn't really change. And I don't think it's just him competing with the rookie Vaughn. I think it's just, I don't see it lasting very deep into the season where he can maintain a relevant role enough to where you want to start them. There is a world where they both do enough to where you don't want either of them. So definitely keep that in mind. But as for, the way this backfield, I think we're both in agreement that this is going to end up Fournette's backfield at some point. So if the dip is low enough, buy it.
For me, it's kind of like a high-priced Washington football team backfield, right? Like some same question marks, but the guys you're talking about Bryce Love or whoever you're talking about, Leonard Fournette or Ronald Jones, or even Keyshawn Vaughn, who you paid a little bit more for, but it's the same thing, right? Like someone's going to be really good, probably the guy we think is going to be, but you shouldn't really invest a lot into that.
It's definitely one where if the price is there, take it. But like you said, don't go out and start buying him everywhere you can get him because he's going to be the guy that takes the job because there is still a very real world out here where you don't want any of them. So moving on to the next piece of news we got is Cam Newton has officially became the official listed starter. So all the Stidham truthers out there, sorry. I mean, you should have known this was coming. But if you've seen, I actually featured on another podcast my take on Cam Newton there. I really wasn't that big on him because of his weapons. I have started to shift a lot on him because the fit is starting to make a whole lot of sense there. And I'm really, really liking everything that I'm hearing out of camp. So he's one of those where the camp hype has gotten me. and I'm pretty excited about him. But I'm gonna go ahead and let Jay take over because he's somebody that has beaten me to the race on grabbing him in just about every single Dynasty league we're in, and so I'm gonna let him explain his excitement for him.
Yeah, I mean, we actually grabbed Cam in one of our. I grabbed Cam in one of our first early dynasty leagues, just real late as a flyer, and then just held on to him just out of pure kind of just whatever ism, just because. And eventually, as he started to, got signed by the Patriots, I'm like, well, I'll just keep him. Got some solid offers for him. I'm like, well, I'll just hold. And then really, once he got into the Patriots camp, I just kind of watched his Twitter feed and watched his commitment to the team. And so what we actually got sold on Cam was how they were talking about he's the hardest working guy on the squad, and how he was being a leader in the training camp even before he was assigned a starter. And so for me, it's like if he's healthy, I mean, he's been training, and then he's outworking everyone else, and to where the Patriots are like giving him accolades for his work ethic, a team who had Tom Brady before. Then to me, it's like they're going to mold that system to work around him. And I don't know what their team's going to look like as a whole, but I mean, that guy's going to produce. And so for me, they're going to figure out how to make that work in that Patriot system. And it's not going to try to be plug Cam into Tom Brady. It's going to be a Cam Newton team. And especially with, James White and Edelman, guys who can get quick passes. I mean, if you remember about Cam, he did pretty good with a pass catching running back and a quick burst wide receiver in the past. And so for me, once I saw that, like kind of Cam height at camp, so tough sentence there, I was all in. And so I started buying him up. And then he became starter, and then it became more public, and then his price skyrocketed. But I definitely jumped the board as soon as I can.
The single piece of news that came out about him that made me really, because him becoming the starter, I kind of expected. But the thing that put it over the top for me was that they made him one of the only 3 team captains. And I was like, okay, this guy just came in. I've been hearing about how hard he's working, how he's been clicking with the coaches, and then they come out and make him a team captain, which is actually a pretty big deal. And I was like, okay, this is his team. They're going to let him do what he does best. It's Belichick, who's one of, if not the greatest coach of all time, and he changes his team every single year. Usually it's still around Tom Brady, but the offense flows how their weapons on the receiving corps is. Like back when they had Randy Moss and Gronk and everybody was just flying on all cylinders, they aired it out and Tom Brady threw over 50 touchdowns. Well, then as it's kind of died down, you've seen a lot of, James White, little short passes being the way they get down the field. They always make fun of Dak for the dink and dunk stuff. That's actually like Tom Brady's been the king of that here lately. And so it kind of shifts based on how the team is built, and he usually builds it around his quarterback, and they've changed every single year. So for everybody who thinks like Cam just doesn't fit this offense, he doesn't fit this system, like there is no system. There's no Belichick system. Belichick is the system. He changes it every single time based on what his team is. So if there was a better coach for him to go to, it would be that. Everybody thought the personalities would clash, but I honestly think Belichick's kind of a bitter about Tom Brady and is kind of publicly accepting Cam just to kind of, twist that knife a little bit more between him and Tom Brady's relationship, because I don't care what people say. I really don't think it's a good one at this point. And so I think he's going out of his way to make it work with Cam too. So I'm all about Cam Newton. His price is super cheap in redraft right now, and in Dynasty, if you catch the right owners who just don't care, you can pull what Jay has done and go around and grab him for like some random bench player and a 3rd round pick, and people are like, yeah, sure, you can have him, he's useless. And then you've got another starter, especially if you're a contender in Dynasty. Especially if you're a contender in Dynasty, Cam should be one of your number 1 targets you go out and get, because he's so cheap. And if he does well this year, he's only 30, 31. He's going to be re-signed, I'm assuming, with New England, and they're going to continue to build and shape the team however he's needing it.
So a lot of times Cam is actually my 3rd quarterback that I pick up. If I have 2 starters and maybe a young guy, I'll end up trading one of those guys for Cam, and then just to plan on starting him. And so if he's a long-term option, that's great. If not, he's got definitely going to give you some solid production over the next couple of years. So and then in some redraft leagues and home leagues, I mean, I've been grabbing Cam last round of the draft, and
People
it's like, Yeah, you're not in on them, which is fine by me. I'm definitely not taking a quarterback early in one QB leagues, anyways. And so if I can get that rushing floor, and then that production from him, like you said, in that Patriots offense, I'll take that all day with Cam. So our next big piece of news is a great wide receiver quarterback combination that unfortunately is not on the same team. So the DeAndre Hopkins deal making him this like
The
top
highest
five
paid. He's the highest paid non-quarterback player in
yeah.
NFL history.
Goodness gracious. And then the other one was Deshaun Watson. I believe that was an extension, which I'm curious how would those have worked had they been on the same team, which another talking point. But I mean, Dallas, you talk a little about how you feel about the Hopkins and Watson deals.
They were making a lot of moves here lately, and I've seen a lot of people like thinking that they were about to make a move for Fournette back when he was open, and it made no sense to me. I was like, oh, they tagged Drake for like just under $9 million, and then they traded for DeAndre with the hopes of re-signing him. That was the whole, like, both sides agreed to it because of that, kind of like the Jalen Ramsey situation in LA. And so they were clearing all this cap, and I knew Hopkins' deal was the one that was coming. And I didn't know what it was going to be. I didn't know they were going to make him the highest paid, but I know that was what the issue was. A lot of people, and granted, trading away Hopkins under any circumstance is stupid, but the reasoning behind it was because the talks were coming out that he was about to threaten to hold out if he didn't get a contract extension, because he was seeing all these other guys getting paid, and he's like, in his opinion, and personally in mine as well, he's like, I'm the best wide receiver in the NFL, and I'm not getting paid like it. These guys are making $6 million. I think he was at $14 million before this. These guys are making like $6-7 million more than me a year, and now he signed a 2-year, $54.5 million extension. That's got him making, I think, like 22.5 per season, I believe it was, which is half more than Julio's 22. And so I knew that deal was coming. And then Deshaun Watson, I've got him pulled up here as well. His was, just to mention it real quick before we move on to him, his was a 4-year, $177 million contract extension as well. But I'll let you expand a little bit more on how you feel about Hopkins.
Yeah, so for the Hopkins deal, I mean, I love it from a football perspective because I'm a huge Hopkins guy. I mean, we both are. I'm curious to see what the fantasy impact of that will be. I don't know if that doesn't necessarily motivate him differently, changes the ceiling of 4. I mean, it just seems like, okay, you got a wide receiver that signed. If this was a fantasy deal, I probably wouldn't have paid that for Hopkins, the fantasy owner. But I definitely think for that team, that was a smart move. That also makes me wonder about what are the thoughts on Kirk, and then what's Larry's plan. And so when we talking about wide receiver 2s or things like that for Arizona, I'm curious how the pieces will all fit together. But I mean, I think it's a great deal for Hopkins. He's worth a lot of money. Now, is he worth the most non-wide quarterback money? I don't know. I can't speak to that. But I mean, if you had any guys to get asked that question for, I definitely put Hopkins at the top of that list.
One thing I just seen here that's actually pretty interesting. I didn't know the actual years on it. It looks like it goes through 2024. So I think in redraft this really has next to zero impact. But in Dynasty, I think this has significant impact because it's not going to be one of those situations where he shows up, things look great and glossy at the start, and then after the year goes, they just couldn't figure out a contract, and there you go again. He's a free agent again next year. Year after that, I think in Dynasty, he's 27 now, and so that's right in the middle of the prime. I think he should still stay. I think he should be a lot more comfortable with him long term now because he's at least signed through 2024. Now, I'm sure there's guarantees that run out before that. So there's still a world where he doesn't play all the way through that with them. But usually these types of receivers, I think he's going to get there, get in the environment with Fitz, and I think he'll probably end up retiring from here, would be my guess, because I think they're going to treat him right. I think the only conflict you can run into is like maybe when Kyler comes up, if his contract's still a problem and he's not wanting to change that, I could see them trading him at that point. But other than that, as long as he's willing to work with the team, which I think he would be because of how much they're paying him, I think it's like $42 million guaranteed at this point in his career. I could see a world where he's like, yeah, y'all take care of me. Let me go ahead and dial it back. I'm good. Get Kyler paid, and we'll ride this thing out. And you see that a lot. Like once they get their payday, they start to work with you a lot more. Like they'll restructure it to where more of it can be contract bonus or signing bonus,
Right.
signing bonus instead of the actual hit against the cap, and they still
Right.
get their money. So I look for this as being all around positive. I can't take anything negative from this unless you're a Houston Texans fan, and it's just a constant reminder. But then
Right.
you have a really good offsetting news in Deshaun Watson that a lot of people were really worried because of the Hopkins trade. He was starting to get really upset about it and was making comments that made it seem like he no longer wanted to be there. And we had some talks in some of our leagues about like the most crazy landing spot for him would have been imagine Deshaun Watson in a Saints jersey next year or a Patriots
Right.
jersey
Yep.
because
Yep.
this was before Cam was signed, of course, for the Patriots one. But like that's still a possibility because these are teams that only had quarterbacks for another year or two. I think
Right.
we're all pretty much sure Drew Brees is probably retiring after this year. I can't imagine he goes for it one more time if they fall short, but he might.
Yeah. You never know.
The way I see it is like with Breeze is if they fall short, he's done. If they win, he goes out on a high note. So
Right.
I think we're 3 years of being right there has got to be just a hard hit for that point of your career. But back to Deshaun Watson, the deal was like I said, 4-year extension, 177 million contract. He's averaging 39 million a year with 27 million bonus.
Wow.
He's the second highest paid quarterback. I did see that. They didn't do the whole like resetting the market every single time, but they did it to an extent. Like Mahomes reset the market, but Mahomes
Right.
is also Mahomes, and so like I
Right.
don't care who you are, you're not going to come to the table and be like, well, Mahomes got this, and like, all right, well, where's your MVP and 50
Right.
touchdown rookie season and Super Bowl ring that you have in year 3? And so I feel like anybody that takes 1 million a year less on average is going to be satisfied with that. And
Right.
the biggest negatives anybody can take out of this is I feel bad for Jerry because I am super curious if Dak comes out and plays well this year, how that's going to go. I'm
Yeah.
worried
Yeah.
as a Cowboys fan. So great news all around, though, for Deshaun Watson. All right, our last piece of news we're going to talk about that just came out today was Kareem Hunt just signed a 2-year extension, which, if I'm not mistaken, keeps him there for the next 3 years. And he's from the area. We are all kind of thinking this may end up happening. He wanted to be in Cleveland. Those of us like me who have been leading the hype train for him in Dynasty, I've been grabbing him everywhere I can just because past this year, if he went anywhere else, he was going to be an absolute smash, and you got him for so cheap that it was absolutely worth it. But it's still not that bad because you got a very good setup here with Stefanski there now that loves running his team through the running backs, whether it be running or passing to them. And they've already talked about all offseason. He's been in the meeting rooms with the slot receivers. And so pretty much anytime Chubb is out there, Hunt's probably going to be out there as a receiver. And then when Chubb isn't out there, Hunt's probably going to be out there as a runner. So my hype for him as a reliable piece on your team doesn't really go down, but the future
Right.
hype that I had for him as becoming a running back 1 next year, that kind of got completely eliminated unless this becomes a situation like you had with Kamara and Ingram where they are both 1s. But I
Right.
don't think Stefanski is the coach Sean Payton is. I don't think he can create that kind of an offense. But it's a possibility, but I can't imagine anybody projecting that. But that's the news. So for all of you like me that were hoping that he went somewhere next year, that's bad news. But there is still good news for this too, because a lot of the free agents next year, I've been saying consistently up until we found out Cook is probably going to be a guaranteed free agent next year, that Kareem Hunt was going to be the number 1 target, and now that's not the case. So you got some other guys that actually become a lot more interesting now in Dynasty next year. And the only other thing this mainly impacts is my view on Chubb. I have been knowingly lower on him, but I've said repeatedly that because Kareem Hunt's leaving next year, most likely, that I don't care. And in Dynasty, his price is still okay because come next year, he'll be the guy again. And this kind of throws a damper on that.
So you guys know I'm a big fan of Nick Chubb. So as a football player, and so I think the Hunt news is kind of a mixed bag because everyone was already out on Chubb because of the presence of Hunt, and so now with the extension, it kind of solidifies his role, as Dallas mentioned earlier, in Cleveland. And so for me, I am not necessarily drafting Chubb as high in draft as most people kind of are at this point, but I'm still trading for Chubb. I mean, the guy's just uber talented, and so for me, with this kind of decline and this news, I'm probably going to send out a few more Chubb offers just so I can have the guy on my roster. Because as much as I enjoy Hunt and the guys are on the field at the same time, and we do kind of channel that kind of Murray Kamara type situation, I want Chubb to be on my team. And so if he loses value, I mean, he's really not going to have a floor. He's not going to be irrelevant. I mean, he's one of the top 5 pure runners in the NFL.
If not
and
the
so
best.
If not the best. And so worst case scenario, and then best case scenario, I mean, he's an elite back still, and he's a young guy. And so whether someone's looking around the idea of them keeping Hunt and then trading Chubb, and you talk about trading Chubb away, which I wouldn't do that. But I mean,
contract reasons, maybe when Baker comes up, I could see that. At that case, then I mean that only benefits Chubb because naturally, if he's being traded, he's going to a workhorse role.
So I mean, if you look at his production, it's up there, and right now he's kind of at his floor of like, kind of where people feel on him. And so right now, that's my chance to buy him, which is not really cheap. I mean, he's not a cheap running back. He's a top 15, top 12 running back, but I'll take that price, that 12, 13th running back price for a guy that can give me top 5, top 8 production all day.
Yeah, and like I said, when I talk about Chubb, I say I'm lower than most, and that's not false. I'm not out on him. I have him as like RB13 this year, but I mean he's still, like he said, he's got a floor that's there that is always going to be there, and it's much higher than most other players. And don't hear what I'm not saying. This is still Chubb's backfield. I mean, wholeheartedly. I just think Kareem Hunt eats into it a lot more than people think, in a lot more ways than just the passing work. But I think this, who knows? I mean, they could both get better as time goes on, the more they mesh with each other. Like I said, best case scenario, you have the Ingram-Kamara years. And then worst case scenario, you probably get more of what you had last year, where they're both worst case RB2s, and then best case Chubb's a 1 and Hunt's a 2. Or I mean, best is they're both 1s. But, like, if things don't go well, then you still got Chubb as a 1 and Hunt as a 2 in most cases. So it's not that huge of a deal. The biggest negative out of all this was the hope that Hunt went somewhere else for both players to improve. And so, because that basically the hopes that Chubb eventually gets the passing work, you can completely throw that out. And by the time Hunt does leave, if he ever does, he'd be so deep into the career of Chubb that he's just established that's not his role. But other than that, I think this is good news for long-term Dynasty. It's not the greatest. And so, but the good news is that at least you don't have to keep guessing, and now you don't have to stash him hoping. You don't have to worry about it in trades where if you're trying to trade with somebody like me that's like, no, he's an RB1 next year, and then you just can never acquire Hunt because of that. You don't have to worry about that anymore. All right, so that's all we got for news right now. We're introducing a new segment here we got called Gimme All That. It's where we basically we both chose 1 or 2 players. We chose 1 or 2 offenses as a whole, and then we chose 1 or 2 wide receiver set / backfield set. So, like, if you had 2 wide receivers from the same team or an entire backfield that you wanted multiple players of, and we went through the league and we both picked different ones for each of these categories. And just before he mentions his first player, just want to clarify, this is a Dynasty segment. So this is for Dynasty. This is for guys we like long-term, and we're grabbing everywhere we can, whether it be through startup drafts or trading for them. But I'm going to let him kick off his first player.
Yeah, so my first player that we mentioned earlier is Cam Newton. And I mean, really, a lot of it has to do with his price tag right now. It's starting to go up just a little bit. You're starting not to be able to snag him for only a future first. But, I mean, really, the downside versus the upside for Cam is huge. And so he's definitely a guy that I'm trying to get all of. And I have Cam in more than half my leagues now. And so I'm going to continue that pursuit as well.
Yeah, Cam Newton's somebody, like we said earlier, I'm same boat, trying to get him everywhere I can. His price is going slightly up. I mean, to the point where now, like he said, sometimes you got to include a first for it. But to get a starting quarterback, especially in Superflex leagues, it's absolutely worth it. Especially if you're a contender. If you're a contender, he's one of my top targets for sure. All right, so my first player I'm going to say is Kenyon Drake. This is somebody that I'm trying to get everywhere I can right now because I'm in the group that thinks he will get an extension. I think it's something they're actively working on, but they wanted to figure out Hopkins' situation first. they're in this window right now where they have a stud quarterback in Kyler Murray that is on a rookie contract and will be for a couple more years, so they can afford to pay these other positions. It's kind of the same situation you've seen with Joe Mixon getting his big payday because they don't really have to pay Burrow for a while, and the biggest chunk is almost always the quarterback. Keenan Allen, another example, just got his payday that we forgot to mention in the news, where it's because they don't have to pay a quarterback that much, and so you usually see these kind of guys get taken care of. So I look for Drake to get extended, and he's, for the most part, for his production, I have him as the RB8 this season, and so for his cost, you can go out and move, Chris Carson plus a decent pick to go grab Drake. You can get Edmonds for really cheap. Edmonds is one of the more difficult players to get, so you kind of got to hope that he's on the team with Drake so you can add them as a bundle, because a lot of guys are on that. Oh, he's young, he showed he can do it, and if they don't extend Drake, then I've got a starter here that's going to be a great player. So a lot of times I try to get them both if I can, but I don't really see Edmonds as a threat. I see him more of, if he goes down, you still have the security. He's a guy worth handcuffing, because that offense is so dominant when it comes to the running back position that you want whatever piece is getting it, and I think it's going to be Drake. But if he goes down, Edmonds immediately becomes super valuable too. So Drake is my guy I'm trying to grab everywhere I can for his current price.
So the next guy that I'm trying to get a hold of everywhere is DJ Moore. The DJ Moore hype's kind of quieted down a little bit from him, and that's not with me, because it kind of gives him a more reasonable, not reasonable, but cheaper price tag before it just blows up. And so I'm trying to get as many DJ Moore shares as I can. I mean, the guy's young, and so he's a guy that will reproduce beyond his ADP, and so he does fall in leagues every now and then, unless you have a bunch of savvy owners that like to just trying to pick him up as soon as I possibly can.
Yeah, we mentioned it a lot in our wide receiver episode about how Teddy Bridgewater should not be something you worry about with DJ Moore. He's a perfect quarterback for him. The saying I've been saying a lot, that people are like, man, you just paid a lot for DJ Moore. And in my personal opinion, I'm looking at him as he's a 23-year-old wide receiver that is probably going to finish as a wide receiver 1 this year. And in Dynasty, that means he's probably going to turn into a top 5 wide receiver next year because he's so young. Same reason Chris Godwin's out there, top 5, top 6. He's going to be right there in that category. And so my opinion is the prices that I've been getting him for are a lot cheaper than what they're about to be next year. And so if you have DJ Moore on your team already and you're stacked at wide receiver and can afford it, don't move him yet. Let him have this breakout season. He's going to benefit your team, and then trade him next year because his value is going to skyrocket if he does what we think he will.
Yeah.
My next player that we got is Robert Woods. He's somebody that both of us are extremely high on because his price is just so cheap. It's even cheaper in Dynasty. It's cheap enough in redraft. It's even cheaper in Dynasty. He's 27. He's boring. Nobody cares. And he's going to be a wide receiver 1. I mean, and he's somebody you can grab as your wide receiver 3 or 4 in Dynasty because most people are all about Cup. I mean, I honestly would trade Cup for Woods right now and just make the other person give me more, even though I have Woods higher in production, because they're going to value Cup higher. And one thing you need to remember is, like, we do this with different players. We're 27, God, he's old. And you turn around and a different player, 27 is their prime. I hear that argument for Odell all the time. And that's 27 is prime. It's like 27 to 29 is their prime years, and then if you're an alpha elite guy, you go on a little bit further. So Woods is somebody you should be getting everywhere you can because he is super cheap and is going to benefit you if you're a contender.
So the offense that I want all of is the Browns. And so the Kareem Hunt signing kind of confuses things a little bit. But I think just the price tag of OBJ, Landry, Baker Mayfield, Kareem Hunt, and Nick Chubb, just as a whole, is pretty cheap. They're predicted to be pretty bad as an offense, and I think they'll be productive. And so this is a really cheap time for me to grab the guys that I'm looking for, especially on that Browns team. So yes, it isn't the most flashy offense, and no, they won't be the most high-powered offense, but it's going to continue to be an effective offense. We'll see how they work with the Hunt-Chubb combination, but I'm definitely really on board with the whole team, the team as a whole.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest Odell guy at all. On his current price, I'm okay with him. He's fallen for almost everybody, and he does still have the upside. I've not eliminated that yet. And then Jarvis is going to get you what you need every single week. And then you know how I feel about Hunt, and we both know how good Chubb is. So that's an offense. Hooper's the only one I'm probably out on, but they've got so many other pieces. You can't have a spectacular everywhere. So my offense that I have is the Atlanta Falcons. Calvin Ridley's everybody's favorite breakout this year. Everybody's been jumping on board. Julio's Julio. He doesn't even need an explanation. Matt Ryan is somebody that, although he is one of the older quarterbacks, he's another one that's been talking about wanting to play a few more years. So he's still, if you're a contender, a good piece to go after. And then Hayden Hurst, I'm the leader of that hype train. I'm all about him. Got him as a top 5 tight end this season, and then he's so young. It's just going to be a solid piece that you have in your team for the next 10 years if your league lasts that long. So, and Gurley's Gurley. I mean, if you can get him cheap, great. If not, I actually like grabbing Brian Hill because there were some people upset that he didn't get an opportunity. So, and he's dirt cheap too. So, Gurley's not going to get all of the work, and if he gets hurt, like we're all still worried about potentially, Brian Hill's another good piece to stash too. So I'm all about the Falcons offense. Okay.
So the backfield that I want all of is the Baltimore backfield, especially with Dobbins and Ingram splitting work, especially since that Ingram will spend a lot of the early seasons, from what we're hearing, with the ball, and then Dobbins will take over as the season progresses. So when you're looking at a dynasty draft, Ingram is going to be pretty cheap because of his age, and Dobbins will be relatively cheap depending upon just the experience of the guys around you. And so I'm happy to take that combination, that stack, that they may be both in at the same time and have some fantasy relevance. So having Ingram in the short term and Dobbins in the long term is was a winning strategy for me, because one, I love Dobbins as a running back, but two, you're not really missing a lot of the production because that backfield is going to be strong either way. So the Ingram and Dobbins backfield in Baltimore is one I always want to have in my back pocket.
Yeah, I'm all about it too. Ingram's so cheap right now in Dynasty that it's actually a little shocking. I do find myself not really wanting him if I don't have Dobbins, but if I do have Dobbins and I happen to acquire him and I'm still a contender, then yeah, I go and grab Ingram if I can because he's next to nothing. So my set is the Detroit Lions wide receivers. You already know how Golladay is. We've got him as a wide receiver 1. In Dynasty, he should be a smash for years to come. And as for Marvin Jones, I mean, he's every year just super cheap. Dynasty, he's next to nothing at this point. And he's somebody, if you're a contender, he's going to help you big time. Redraft, it goes unspoken. But in Dynasty, he's somebody that kind of gets buried and swept away. If you're one of those guys that's trying to continue, trying to think, what pieces can I add to put me over the top? Marvin Jones is one of the best ones you can go out and get because he's going to get you great production. And then he's also a great piece to move. I just made a trade for I really needed a tight end, and so I added him plus a pick to go get Hayden Hurst. So, I mean, he's somebody that people still hold value to, but they're realistic about him. Everybody always has been for some reason. So I'm all about that wide receiver set. All right, so that's been our Gimme All That segment. That's basically something we'll probably do every year. Guys that we really like and trying to grab every year, and Dynasty kind of give you an update of how the market's looking at that time. Also gives you a good reference point to look back at like kind of how things played out. So this last one is me bringing back a segment now that we have kicked the show off. This is something I did last year but never got to really implement it on a weekly basis, was THORN. Quick explanation of what it was is it's kind of like a thorn in the foot, a player that just causes you grief. And the player I chose from 2 years ago was Jamal Williams. Because of every time he'd show up, everybody wanted Aaron Jones to get all the work, and Jamal Williams was just there to hurt him. And then we saw last year, Jamal Williams, finally they plucked the thorn, and Aaron Jones was the RB2. So, I mean, I think my projections, if I went back and looked at the stats of with and without Jamal Williams 2 years ago, was like the RB4 that season. So, so to kind of reintroduce it, we're picking our thorn of the year from last year, and then we'll have the thorn of the week every single week, and you guys can submit your submissions in the comments below of like who you think should have been the thorn and your opinions on it. And we always love seeing that stuff. You can tweet it to us ahead of episodes to kind of have us in consideration. And if you're the one that gave us the idea of it and we chose it, then we'll mention you in it as well. So our thorn of the year last year was Kareem Hunt. That's the one we went with. He's kind of been a reoccurring figure in this episode, and it was mainly because of you seen the run Chubb was on while Hunt was suspended, and he was the RB4 when Hubb was coming back. And then if you take just the segment from when Hunt was there to the end of the season, he fell all the way down to the RB18, and Hunt was the RB27. So Hunt was still relevant. He wasn't just this guy that you can't stand existed, but we can all say with confidence that it was more negative than positive of an impact in fantasy because Chubb was having an amazing year before he showed up.
Right.
All right, guys, that's going to be it for this episode. We got some interesting stuff coming up for our next one. Make sure you leave some comments and some feedback. Hit us up on Twitter. You can see our handles right below our pictures here. If you're listening to one of our podcast formats on Apple or Spotify or another one of those, it's at DallasFFO and at Pick on the Block. To reach us on Twitter, the official Twitter is at the FF Outpost. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you guys. Thank you.